Hello, beautiful soul family. Rebecca here, your vibe mentor, bringing you another video on how to raise your vibration so you can live your best life. Let's talk about attachment styles today. So, as you know, we have talked a lot about overcoming the dark night of the soul, stepping into your life purpose, which, come to find out, requires that you heal unhealed wounds like complex trauma or the unworthiness wound that will keep you from stepping into your life purpose. Now, once you have started down that process, you're starting to heal the unworthiness wound, you're becoming whole and complete again, it is very important to understand not only your attachment style, but also the attachment style of others. That oftentimes we can get triggered by the behaviors of someone else and not realize that our response may be coming from our trauma or our unhealed wounds, and also how to recognize who we're engaging with and what their response may mean about what they've experienced in life. And many times we tell ourselves a story or we assign meaning to someone's behavior that is inaccurate and it is not serving us. That it may create a sense of fear or trigger an old wound when really it is just a coping mechanism or a style of relating that this person has adopted due to their own experiences and their own trauma. So this video should be able to help you identify not only how you respond and what your attachment style is, but also how others respond and what their attachment style is. Now, if we are triggered, we are likely to revert to one of our 4Fs, so fight, flight, fawn, or freeze. And if you find yourself feeling in that triggered state where you go to your preferred F, whatever that may be, if you're a typical flight person or a typical fawn person, then that will be the indication to kind of take a step back and look at what was the external stimuli, what was the story I told myself. Is this situation really requiring that I activate my nervous system and stress out my mind and my body, or could this be something that I need to reframe and understand as just a typical trigger, I guess is the best word I can come up with, that I need to better identify early on so that we don't have to go down the rabbit hole of over exaggerated responses. So this can be very helpful in understanding yourself and what you need, as well as who you're relating to and what they may need to prevent any triggers. Now, I will say, as it relates to triggers, trauma responses, attachment styles, let me separate those. Triggers and trauma responses can be healed and desensitized and reduced. They do not have to impact you as much as they may in the early stages of healing throughout the rest of your life. You can reduce them, you may never completely remove them. Now, add to that attachment styles, your current attachment style is not always going to be your forever or permanent attachment style, that you can heal enough to move into better, more healthy, secure attachment. Now, there are only 4 types. We'll get into that in a minute, but secure attachment ultimately is the goal for all of us. It is something that we are able to move into, that we can shift, adapt, heal, and grow into. But you may always have a need to be aware of those triggers, to be aware of those trauma responses, and they become actually healthy boundaries where you're able to identify your unhealed attachment style and recognize the triggers that send you into some of the behaviors relative to your attachment style, so that you can communicate your boundaries and let your partner know and say, when I feel unsafe, this will cause me to revert to my preferred F, which might be to freeze or to fawn, whatever that might be. And I'll get into the specifics on that in a second. But just know that understanding what your triggers are is going to be very important. Understanding where they came from in your trauma will help you understand what you need in the way of setting boundaries so that you can move from these insecure attachment styles to a secure attachment style. Okay, so what are the attachment styles? First and foremost, secure, the goal, the ultimate state of being. Then there is avoidant, otherwise known as dismissive. Then there is anxious, otherwise known as preoccupied. And then there's a fourth called disorganized, which can be sort of a variation of the avoidant and anxious combined. There are other terms that can often be used: fearful avoidant, anxious ambivalent. All these terms relate to these primary four. So I will recap those as we go along to make sure that there's no confusion there. So what is a secure attachment? Let's start with what good looks like. All right, so a secure attachment is low avoidance, so you're not avoiding others, and it's also low anxiety, where you don't feel anxious around the engagement, the attachment. This typically relates to more intimate relationships or close relationships, but it can apply to all relationships in general. There's comfortable with intimacy. You're not worried about rejection or preoccupation with a relationship. It is easy for us to get close to others. You're comfortable depending on others and having them depend on us. And we don't worry about being abandoned or about someone getting too close, right? That, again, keeping in mind as we go through this list, that if you do not feel these current things today, if you do not feel these things currently today, you are able to work on a desire for intimacy, a desire for closeness, a desire for interdependence. You rely on me, I rely on you. We can discuss things that don't go well so that we can work towards more desirable outcomes in the future, instead of, again, the key is kind of avoidance and unspoken or unprocessed emotion around that, usually resulting in anxiety. We may also feel comfortable in a warm and loving and emotional close relationship. We will depend on our partners and allow our partners to depend on them, or us, rather. We want to be available for each other in our times of need, right? Our customers, our partners have a need for separateness and also, yet at the same time, connectedness. There is not a sense of rejection or threat when the separateness needs to take place, right? We're trusting and empathic, tolerant of differences, and forgiving of any mistakes. And also, when there is a mistake, we have a genuine effort or sense of desire to correct the issue. Finding mutually agreeable solutions, right? That no one person is outed or abandoned. We communicate emotions and needs honestly and openly. We are attuned to each other's needs and respond appropriately. We do not avoid conflict. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't take some time to process and come back to it when you are ready to process and address it. It's more so the concern around sweeping things under the rug permanently or indefinitely. We have insight, resolution, and forgiveness around past relationships and hurts. We are sensitive, warm, and caring, attuned to each other's needs, and we essentially securely attach. We feel secure in our attachment. So safety is a big part of this conversation, regardless of the attachment style. So the remainder of these attachment styles are called insecure attachment styles. So the next one would be avoidant or dismissive, also sometimes called dismissive avoidant, or DA for short. You're high on the anxiety scale. High on the avoidance scale, low on the anxiety scale. You avoid those situations that are going to make you feel uncomfortable. You avoid connection, avoid all the things that bring you fear. We're uncomfortable with closeness, primarily value independence and freedom over connection. We're not too worried about our other partner's availability. We may be uncomfortable even being close to others. We find it difficult to trust and depend on. We prefer others not depend on us. And it's very important to feel independent and self-sufficient. This is where hyper-independence comes in, where we're not willing to lean on or be leaned on. Our partner may want more intimacy than we are comfortable with. This attachment style, if you fall in this attachment style, you'll likely have a very high level of a fight response. flight response, where you need to self-soothe. You need to go away to be able to bring yourself back to a state of feeling secure and safe so that you can come back to the relationship and operate in or from a secure place. Also very high in a freeze response, but we can be prone to passive aggressive responses. So the freeze will happen in the moment where we're not comfortable addressing the situation, asking for what we need, calling out behaviors that are not serving for the relationship, but yet we will sort of keep that inside until a later time where we've processed, we've come back to that safe and secure place, and now we're ready to address it, but there's a fear around the addressing it, so it causes sort of an outburst where it has to come to a boiling point and you erupt to give yourself enough strength and courage to be able to address the issue. Typically, the dismissive avoidant is low in fight response, just don't want to address it. The next style is anxious or preoccupied, or anxious, preoccupied, anxious. You can switch them around, doesn't really matter. They are low on avoidance and high on anxiety. They crave closeness and intimacy. They're very insecure about relationships. They want to be extremely emotionally close and basically merge with the other person. But they're reluctant to get as close as others are reluctant to get as close as you would like, where you feel like you're constantly pining for the intimacy and the closeness. It can often bleed into being a vampire or sort of living off of others' energy. They often worry that the partner doesn't love or value them. They often worry about abandonment. There's an inordinate need for closeness that scares people away. And typically the most common response is a fawn response. And the reason for that is the other responses like fight or flight typically will create the abandonment that they fear. So a fawn response gains favor, it avoids conflict, it prevents the abandonment, allows them to gain a sense of safety, and they are ultimately trying to avoid the abandonment and survive. From their perspective, being alone and not having that closeness is equivalent to death, essentially. It feels like an emotional death to them. Freeze would be next most common, where they don't get abandoned, but they're tolerant of inappropriate behavior. Fight will only increase the risk of abandonment, so that is lower in terms of their typical responses. Of course, all of this is generalized. There are exceptions to the rule, but we have to categorize things to understand them. And then lastly is flight, and that, like I said, is because they fear abandonment most. So then the last one is a disorganized, otherwise known as fearful avoidant or anxious avoidant. They are high on anxiety as well as high on avoidance. They're uncomfortable with intimacy, worried about a partner's commitment and love, uncomfortable getting close to others and yet desire connection, find it difficult to trust and depend on others, and worry if the partner gets too close. They might get hurt, right? So the highest response to this is the fawn response. They are caretaking, they're people pleasing. Essentially, it's just don't rock the boat, don't cause any conflicts, very passive, very porous boundaries, and all of this to avoid the pain of being abandoned and to not rock the boat, and yet also at the same time desiring intimacy and connection and needing that closeness. You can see where this would cause a lot of disorganization, essentially emotional chaos. The highest response of the 4 F's is the fawn response again, caretaking and people pleasing. Fight response is also high. So they're attacking, they're also very defensive, hyper defensive. Essentially anything you say will warrant sort of a defensive response. Their fight response is typically very dysregulated. It's a symptom of the internal chaos and the system dysregulation. They have a very aggressive, hard shell, And oftentimes they also can have a even high flight response. So high in fawn, high in fight, and flight can also be strong. So you can understand how challenging this dynamic can be to work with. And then freeze is usually last because they couldn't afford to freeze. There was an unsafe situation in their childhood or at some point in life where they created all of these different coping mechanisms or responses in an effort to survive, to stay alive, and that if they were to freeze, that would essentially be the death of them. They would not have been able to survive whatever they were traumatized with earlier in life. And so they're hypervigilant, always on, always in fight, flight, fawn, and cannot afford to freeze. So even that has a sense of need to strive, even to stay out of fawning. So, I'm sorry, out of freezing. So these can be very challenging dynamics to work with, but like I said, none of them are permanent. We can heal and move into secure attachment. It typically starts with the choice, the recognition that we're operating in these behaviors, and the willingness and the commitment to address the trauma, the triggers that initially created these coping mechanisms. And once you start to heal the trauma, you will naturally have a desire to be more interdependent, to put down the fight, flight, fawn, freeze responses, to calm the nervous system and to step into nervous system regulation, to reduce the emotional chaos internally as well as the external chaos in your life, and to be interdependent with these relationships so that you can not only redefine and rediscover who you are so that you can be whole and complete and show up in a way that is nurturing and supportive and secure for your partner, but also so that you can do these things for yourself. And all of this is possible with support. So I am here to facilitate any trauma healing that you may feel you need. And I encourage you, if the word trauma is too much, if you feel like I don't have trauma, it's called complex trauma because it's an invisible trauma. And if you've ever questioned, I early on in discovering these things, I thought, I don't have flashbacks. I don't see things of my past, so I must not have trauma. Essentially, we experience emotional flashbacks. So when something outside of you triggers you and you feel that inflamed, exaggerated intensity in your body as a response, that is called an emotional trigger or an emotional flashback. And I would say that a vast majority of the world has some sort of complex trauma. And again, if that word is too much for you, if you struggle with unworthiness, if you struggle with codependency, if you struggle with a dependency on relationships or others, or you feel insecure in relationship in any way, all of those factors essentially are healed by the same process that you would use to heal complex trauma. So again, I am a brain spotting facilitator. I believe, most effective tool out there to heal any of these situations, and I believe in it because I have tried literally everything out there. So it is the softest, most easy way to heal. You get to rely on the body and stop thinking about everything and having to fix it from the level of the mind. So I digress. If you have any questions about this, let me know. I would love to hear, what do you feel your attachment style is? I will link below a questionnaire on attachment style, so you can go out there, completely unrelated to me, and you can go out there and discover what is your attachment style so that you can learn more about how to heal and move into secure attachment. All right, guys, please do like, subscribe, and share to keep the channel going. And if you want to click this button to subscribe, or otherwise you can click this button to watch the next video. All right, I'll see you guys on the next video. Take care. Namaste.